Life is exciting. Life is really, really exciting. You know, I was thinking about life and how amazing life is, and the challenge we've got in the midst of everything, of recognizing where we are, but also recognizing that the vision that is shared to us as the body of Christ is really big. It's really, really big. When Michael shares about planting churches and planting training centres and planting businesses, I get really excited. And over the last week, spending a lot of time with Jerry, when Jerry's sharing about things as well, even in conversation, I've been getting really excited too. And so you hear these men of God who share this vision, which is really exciting, but there's still the reality that where we are now and where this vision is being cast at, there's a big gap. There's a journey that we need to go on individually and corporately as churches to be able to see this vision that's being shared with us, that God has for us, come to fruition and come to pass. Sometimes, in the midst of all of it, we can still feel a bit detached. Sometimes we can still feel like it's just too big, that what can I do to see that happen? Can I really play a role? Can I really play a part in that? Sometimes we look at what is being shared and we think, well, I'll cheer on everyone else as they do it and I'll just see what happens. And so what I want to share on this morning is something that you've heard many times, and I'm hoping that I can bring a slightly new perspective, as well as reinforcing a number of things that you will have heard as well. I want to talk to you about sonship. Because there's an amazing opportunity for us to look beyond perhaps the things that hold us back, to look beyond the feeling that what do we have to bring, what do we have to offer, and to throw ourselves into a family that's on the move. A family that's marching forward. God's kingdom is advancing, and I, for one, want to be involved in that in any way I can. I want to be part of what God is doing in the nations. Sonship is a really deliberate journey. Sonship is not something that is enforced on you by fathers. Sonship isn't something where Jerry says, you need to do this because I'm a father. You need to be sons, so just do it. Sonship is a decision that all of us make in our hearts, where we say, I'm going to put into practice the principles that I'm learning, and I'm going to watch what God does in my life, so that I can be a blessing to the people that God has called me to be a blessing to. So like I say, you may have heard some of the things that I'm going to share this morning before, but I trust that you're still encouraged, because we're going to be learning from a master. We're going to be learning from the greatest person that there is to learn from over this morning. So we're going to be looking through a few verses in Luke, in chapter 2 and chapter 3. And we're going to start in Luke chapter 2. And this is a story that I'm sure you're familiar with. This story, we're going to begin with Jesus at age 12. Jesus is in the temple, and Jesus is speaking with some of the religious leaders at that time, and you'll know the story that what Jesus has to share at age 12 is causing an interesting response. So I think the scripture is possibly going to come up. There we go, look at that. So this is what happens when Jesus is speaking with the religious leaders. People look on, and Luke records this, that everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. Now Cass and I, we lead a youth ministry, and sometimes the things that teenagers come out with is amazing. I think that's wisdom beyond your years. That's a really profound statement you've made. That's a really good decision you've made. Sometimes it's not quite like that. There's a lot of 12-year-olds that aren't quite in that place yet. And so for me to think about the 12-year-olds I work with, and to think that of a 12-year-old who's in the temple And having this kind of response from the people, I think everyone will have known that this guy, he is going somewhere. Age 12, people are looking at this guy, Jesus, and they're saying, this guy's got a future. This guy's got some massive potential. Sometimes the way we would then view that potential and what we would do with it isn't really the right thing. And what I suspect is that if Jesus were in the midst of a number of churches today and was sharing these things, and the leaders of the churches are saying, this guy's amazing, he's 12, or we think, well, he's ready. Let's start a ministry. Jesus Christ International Ministries. Let's set up his podcast. Let's get his website going. Let's get a YouTube channel where we can start sharing some of his videos. We'll get him a private jet. We'll fly him around the world. He can speak at all the conferences. He can lay hands on the people. It doesn't matter that he's 12. Let's get this guy going. He knows his stuff. He's amazing people with his answers. But Luke tells us that wasn't what Jesus decided to do. That wasn't the decision that Jesus made. In a sense, it's almost a fork in the road. For Jesus, as a 12-year-old boy, to know that when it comes to his understanding, when it comes to his knowledge of the scriptures, he's already at a place where he can be with the greatest minds of the day and not be intellectually dwarfed. Does that make sense? He knows he's already there, and so he's got a choice. He can launch off and just begin things straight away, or he can take another option, the option that we see him doing. Jesus modeled something different, and what Jesus modeled over the next period of his life, as I've learned about it, it's captivated me. As I've begun in my life to apply the same principles and to see fruit coming in my life, I've realized that Jesus did something really, really clever. He did something the way that God wanted him to do it. It's sonship. It's sonship. And so what we're going to look at this morning is sonship from the perspective of a son. The decisions that Jesus made as a son, as a biological son to Joseph and Mary, and also the son of the living God. The decisions that he made. And I'm trusting that as we look at a few of those key decisions, that perhaps things will encourage you and excite you, that we see the decisions Jesus made and the fruit that it bore in his life. I'm trusting that it'll encourage you in your walk as a son to make similar decisions. So what does it look like? Sonship can be this big term that can seem a little bit vague and a little bit out there and just easy to throw around. So we're going to see from Jesus, we're going to see from the greatest man that ever lived, practically, what does this look like? So, just a few verses on from this, we see Jesus making a decision about how this is all going to start, how this is all going to begin. So, just a few verses later, he's back with his parents, and in Luke chapter 2, verse 51, we read this. We see that Jesus, with his parents, they went down to Nazareth, and he was obedient to them. And his mother treasured all these things in her heart. The Bible doesn't tell us specifically how intellectually brilliant Mary and Joseph were. We don't know. But we do know that Jesus was intellectually brilliant at age 12. And at age 12, we read that he made this decision. That he decided he was going to be obedient to his parents. He was going to be obedient to his parents. And that means obedience is when someone asks something of you and you follow that and you submit to that. So this isn't a picture of Jesus going back and living with Mary and Joseph just so that he's got a roof over his head until the time comes to launch into his ministry. This isn't a case of, I feel like my ministry is coming soon, but it's not quite yet. So what I'll do is I'll just hang around in a church, and then I'll wait for the time when my ministry comes. This is Jesus positioning himself under his parents and being obedient to what it was that they were asking of him, to what it was that they were requiring of him. And in our journey of sonship, that heart posture to welcome input into our life from the leaders that God's placed above us is so important. This is something that I began to experience the fruit of when I was doing a year of training with my 5 Asian Canadian friends about 7 years ago. I was at a place where I was discontented with trying to figure out for myself where I was at. I didn't want Ben to decide how well Ben was doing. Because when we do that, some of us are unnecessarily harsh on ourselves. We say, I'm a mess, I'm a failure, I get it all wrong. And that might not actually be an accurate picture of where you're at. Some of us are perhaps overly generous towards ourselves. I've made it, I'm doing really well, everything in my life's great, I'm a superhuman being. And perhaps actually there's still rough edges that need to be worked on. And so I decided, you know what? I want to hear from people that I trust, people that I've chosen to position myself under, what they think. And so I grabbed the course leaders of year of training. At that time, there's a couple called Blair and Sylvie. Some of you will have met them. And we had some lunch together, and I said, Blair and Sylvie, give it to me straight. I don't want the nice talk, you don't need to be kind. Just tell me, what is wrong with my life? I made that decision that I want input. I want people to speak into my life because all of us have blind spots. Just like when you're driving and we need wing mirrors, we need a rear view mirror. If you just spend your life looking out of the front of that car, it's a matter of time before you have an accident. It might be within 10 minutes. It might be a week later. At some point, an accident will happen in that car because we need things around us that will help in the areas that we don't necessarily pick things up. We need people that are prepared in love to speak into our life and say, listen, I've noticed this. The way that you speak in these sort of times, the way you interact with these sort of people, the way, and the examples can go on and on. We need people that will speak into our life and give us input in those times. But here's the funny thing, and here's what makes this so much harder, and yet I believe so much more full of blessing. And that's this, that Jesus' parents were not perfect, and Jesus was perfect. For a lot of us, our pride gets in the way, and when we look at our leaders, we compare ourselves to our leaders, and whether we make an accurate comparison or not is irrelevant. We look at our leaders and we say, what have they got to offer to me? What have they got to bring to me that I don't already have? I haven't got anything to learn from them. If anyone in the course of human history had the right to that kind of attitude, it was Jesus. Jesus wasn't just perfect with imperfect parents. Years after this, Jesus made the decision that he was going to lay down his life. He was going to be tortured and crucified so that he could wash away the sins of his parents. Jesus decided that he would lay down his life for his imperfect leaders. Is that making sense? And I want to really encourage us that we can get into a lot of trouble. Our lives can get into a real mess when we allow pride to come in and we put a block in what we allow our leaders to speak into our lives. None of our leaders are perfect. I don't have any perfect leaders in my life except for Jesus Christ. You don't have any perfect leaders at CLC Brampton, but you've got good leaders. You've got leaders whose heart is for you. You've got leaders whose heart is to see you grow, to see you mature, to see you walk in the calling of God for your life. And so invite their input. Invite them to share with you. My final warning, in a sense, is when we look at this, is to prepare ourselves that the opportunity to be offended will come if you choose to make that decision to invite input into your life. You see, if one of your care group leader or one of your ministry leaders or one of the senior leaders here at CLC Brampton, if you've chosen that you want their input, that you want them to be speaking into your life, and then they do that, and they say something you don't like, then what happens? Because then all of a sudden there's an opportunity for the enemy to come in and cause division. For the enemy to say, they don't know what they're talking about. They can't speak to you like that. They don't know what you've been through. They don't know what you've experienced. And so quickly we can become offended, and then we think, let me find another leader. Let me find a leader that's going to know what they're talking about and say the things that are right. Say the things, in reality, it's the things that we just want to hear. But the things that we want to hear aren't always the things that we need to hear. You see, submission to authority isn't true submission until it's been tested. If you have gone to a leader in your life and said, I really want your input. I know I've got blind spots. I want your help. Will you help me to grow? And they say, yes, I'll do that. And then they say things, and they're things that you love and that you agree with, and you think, oh, that's brilliant, thank you so much. Then things are great, things are happy. You only know if you have truly positioned yourself under that leader when the time comes that they say something to you that you don't like. When they point out something in your life that you didn't want them to point out. Then you've got to make a decision. Do I still position myself under this person? Do I trust the authority that God's placed on them? Do I trust the wisdom that God has given to them to help me and to grow me? So let us be people that, like Jesus, make this decision that we're going to begin our journey of sonship by positioning ourselves under our leaders and inviting their input into our lives. The very next verse sums up the next 18 years of Jesus' life. Now, Jesus lived to 33. 18 years, in my simple understanding of maths, is more than half of his life. So more than half of Jesus' life, what's going on in his life, we see in this one verse in the book of Luke. Now remember, Jesus has made the decision that he's going to position himself under his parents. So it was quite nice of Luke to tell us how this went. To tell us, and then Jesus was bored for 18 years. And then Jesus had to hang around with his parents, just waiting for something exciting to happen, waiting for his ministry to begin. But instead, Luke tells us this. And Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and men. 18 years, summarized in like 10 words. 18 years. Jesus made a decision. His journey of sonship would begin with positioning himself under leaders, under his parents. And this is the outcome. The amazing thing about this is that he even needed to. I mean, think about it. He's 12, and the religious leaders, the Jewish guys, I don't know, maybe big beards, and they've got their hats and their robes, and they're sitting in the temple, and here's this 12-year-old kid who's already got the intellect like them. So hasn't he already made it? Hasn't he already got it all? Well, clearly not, because the Bible tells us that for the next 18 years, he continued to grow in wisdom. He continued to grow in stature, and he continued to grow in favor with God and with men. That's an amazing thing, that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the only person that has ever been through an existence on this planet and not sinned needed to grow in wisdom. He needed to grow in stature and in favour with his heavenly Father and with the people around him. You know what that tells me? That tells me that I need that too. That tells me in those times where maybe my opinion of myself has taken a knock, maybe in the times where my opinion of myself has risen too much, that I can remind myself that Jesus Christ needed to grow in wisdom, in stature, and in favour with God and men. I need to grow in those same things. You know what? I've made a decision in my life that I always want to remain someone who is teachable. When I was on year training, I was spending time with Carl and Taryn, again, who many of you will know, and they said to me, Ben, we want to commend you for being really teachable. We want to say well done for having a really teachable heart. And it was something that I'd honestly never thought about up until that point. It was something that I'd never stopped to consider, but it really, really touched me. And you know what I realised in that moment is that I would rather, for the rest of my life, people compliment me on my teachability than on any of the gifts that God's given me. Now, if I were to use a silly example, I don't think I've ever been complimented on my dancing ability. And rightly so. A funny side note is that my dad is perhaps even less gifted in this area than I am. And so my dad has managed to go his whole life avoiding as much dancing as possible. And my dad's begun to impart into my life the wisdom of how you achieve that. So I will pass on to you a little tip that my dad taught me. One evening, we were at a graduation ceremony for one of the training centre courses a few years ago, and I was sitting with my dad, and a dance floor opened up, and people are boogieing, and both of us are thinking, oh dear, it's all right, we'll sit at the table, we'll continue to have a good time. And then you get that person, that one person that likes dancing and is insistent that everyone else has to like dancing. That person that will be dancing on the dance floor, and they'll see you sitting down, and they'll be like, hey, come on, yeah, come and dance. I don't like that person. If I wanted to dance, I'd already be on the dance floor. I'm sitting down because I don't want to dance. Anyway, my dad said to me, I know how to get around this. He said, if that person comes towards us as if they're going to bring us onto the dance floor, close your eyes, put out your hands, and I'll lay hands on you. You can't interrupt people when they're doing ministry. Even for dancing. If my dad's ministering to me, you can't ask me to come dance. That's wisdom from a father. So I've never been complimented on my dancing ability. But even if I was the world's greatest dancer, I would rather people recognize in me a teachability than a dancing gift. You see, I could have a gift for being able to dance, and I could still have a hopeless character. I could be the world's greatest ice hockey player, to be culturally relevant. I could be the world's greatest ice hockey player. And maybe I make it to the big times. Maybe I'm one of the guys in the best teams. I'm getting one of the biggest salaries. All of my games are live, streamed across Canada. And that moment comes where something just trips me up in my personal life or in an actual ice hockey game, and then it's on the front page of the newspaper across the country that Ben has done something really stupid. And my character can let me down. And so that's why I'm so determined that in my life, rather than people saying, wow, you're good at this, or you're good at this, or you're good at this, I would rather people say, you're really willing to learn. I can see that you want to grow. I can see that you want to be taught how to be more like Jesus Christ. The interesting thing about learning, about teachability, is actually we need to recognize that we're all being taught, whether intentionally or not. So you might intentionally be doing things like lead school, where you're learning great principles, where you're learning to be trained up as a leader, or You might be at home watching telly. You're learning. In both ways you're learning. In both ways you're being taught. But who's teaching you and what are they teaching you? See, the telly will teach you. It will teach you many things. Almost none of it is helpful. Almost none of it is useful and productive in your journey to be more like Jesus. That's not saying there's anything wrong with telly. That's just saying we need to recognize that we're being taught. All the time, we're being taught by your colleagues at work. Are they the ones that are teaching and influencing you? Or is there enough of Jesus inside that we're the ones that are teaching and influencing them? All the time, we're being taught. And so we need to ask ourselves, what is it that's teaching us? You know what I've discovered? In the last few years, as I've made the decision that I want to grow as a son, I've used a lot of different things for that. I've listened to a lot of great sermons. I've been through training center courses. I have read some really good books. And that's all been really, really helpful. But there's one thing that stands above everything else that has helped me in my journey of growing in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. And that's been taking on responsibility. You see, anyone can sit at home and listen to a podcast, watch some teachings on YouTube, read 100 really good Christian books. But that doesn't mean we're going to grow in wisdom, stature, and in favor with God and man. We will grow in our understanding, in what we know about our faith and what we know about Jesus. But it's only when we step up and take on responsibility that you get to put that into practice and you see the wisdom growing. You see that stature begin to grow because you know I am someone that is counting the cost and I'm taking out responsibility even though it's not easy. You see that favor growing with God and with the people around you because they can see that you're someone that in the good times and the hard times is prepared to stick it out and take responsibility for something. So I want to really encourage you. Find out what responsibilities you can take on. Speak to the leaders in your life and say, I want to grow. It starts with taking responsibility for ourselves and seeing God working in our lives. And then it progresses as we begin to take on responsibility for things. Ultimately, we will take on responsibility for God's people. But take on responsibility and allow God to grow you in these areas in the midst of that. It's like positioning ourselves to grow. We're positioning ourselves under the leaders, and then we're actively moving forward. We're actively taking on different things that are going to help us to grow. So we've got this picture of Jesus making a decision that his journey of sonship is going to begin with a positioning, that in the midst of that we see him grow, and we see the fruit of that decision of him growing in wisdom, stature, and favor with God and man. And now it would be really interesting if we were able to find out from God the Father himself whether Jesus had made the right decision. Do you agree? So we've seen what Jesus has done and we say, yeah, that's great. We can do that too. We can learn from that. But it would be the icing on the cake if God told us whether this was indeed the right way to conduct ourselves, the right way to grow in sonship. Now, the good news is God did that. So at the end of this 18-year period,